from Abe Weisberger, Rabbi A.B. Weisberger, and also for Rabbi Schneier. A photo of Chasam Sofer, Pashas B'chukoisai. So I took out my Chasam Sofer, and I see that I need to study it, to figure it out. There's some gematria is there, whatever. But the gist of it is very straightforward. The gist is that Tufshin Pei, you're in trouble. That's Tufshin Pei, that's the year we're in. The circumstances are very unfortunate globally. And the Chasam Sofer says, Tufshin Pei Aleph is mei ashpois yorim evyon. So yeah, I took out a tilim, a halal, mit a chesh gesagt halal. So let me translate, I'll read for you in English. Oh boy, this is heavy stuff. B'shteit mikimi meyafar dol. He raises the poor from the dust. Yeah, mei ashpo, yeah, like lifts the destitute from the mei ashpois yorim evyon. Lifts the destitute from the dunghill. Oh boy, is it. Oh boy, is it. So achem vei. Ashpois, oh boy, Ashpois. So may Ashpois is Tov Shin, Ashpois, Tov Shin Pei Aleph. So when you find yourself in a situation that you really are so good versetzt, is may Ashpois Yorim Evyoim. So he will raise them, lift them from the destitute, from the dunghill, to seat them with the nobles of his people. No halavai, 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 amen. In so the Rabbi should take geben as Tov Pei Aleph soll sein ein Jahr von Meashpois Yorim Evyon. Amen. L'chaim. Verdammt darf man sagen L'chaim, L'chaim. Yashekoyach. And we're moving on. Now this shir today, I'm going to share with you. Many of you may have heard the shir, but a review can't hurt. And not just it can't hurt, it's definitely beneficial. And alavai, we should know the shir by heart because it's a fascinating shir. What the Rogatchover says is fascinating, and therefore this shir is negated to every single yid out there and globally, because as we'll go on and explain what the shir is about, as we'll see what the shir is about, I don't want to spill the beans now. I'm keeping you in suspense, so therefore you should hang in until the end of the shir, even if we go over time 5 minutes. So I'm letting you know every single yid out there, that's a father and a mother and a baba and a zayda, and Alter Zayda, Allah is negated, this shir is negated to you, and it's essential. And B'meila, therefore, like I say, it's a fascinating word of the Rogatchover going. No one says it before, and no one is zeicher to say it after. And what the most unfortunate thing is, that no one references this Rogatchover. It's all in the Torah. And I will share with you, a lot of the information I will share with you tonight is from the Encyclopedia Talmudis. I don't often quote it, even though I use it, but I dafka will quote it tonight. The Ilu Nishmas, the editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudis, from Nechemya Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, who was a big Dayan, a big Gaon. He was just nifter the past week, and he was the chief editor. He was the editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudis. And therefore, I felt, let me use the last volume, which is negated to our shir tonight. It's the last volume. It's volume 44, Mem Daled, and it deals with a lot of the issues which we're going to discuss. So I used it. So a lot of the references is thanks to the Encyclopedia Talmudis, volume 44. So a lot of you, if you just open the Encyclopedia Talmudis, you yourselves can say the shir yourself. You would have saved you some time and trouble. But nevertheless, Baruch Hashem, we're sharing it, and mainly what is most unfortunate, und the Yakir is sicher in Olam HaEmes at the Wissen the Memes, he doesn't quote the Rogatchover. So he's not to blame, because every individual gets their section, and each one does it. Different daily Yisrael to work on it, and it's poshet shameful. I don't want to say. Ich will nicht sagen Sachil Hashem, Efshe Sachil Hashem, that they reference all the different achronim and the Rogatchover, which is they're published Rogatchovers in different sforim. So some of them are new manuscripts. You can't blame them. They don't know to have the new manuscripts, but some of them they should have accessed and referenced. And so, image adafte was verteidigt in dem Rogatchover's covered. Ich bin nicht dem Rogatchover going Apotropis, halavai wollte gewinnen sein Apotropis, aber al kolponim uns alle, all of us should go out of our way to verteidig his covered. Unfortunately, like I say, he's just not referenced. It's a nicht zu glauben. I'll call upon him.
Nach Hecht. You know, I mentioned it to Professor Steinberg. I'm on the board of the encyclopedia. It has to be put there. It can be corrected.
What if I tell you it's not just this volume? Listen, you know, let's talk about it when it's not recorded, because I have some other things to share with you. It's all good, but I'm a big fan of the Encyclopedia Talmudis. Why? Because my mentor, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Chusi Yogan Aleinu, references the Encyclopedia Talmudis in his 39 volumes of Levukut Sichas, right, left, and center. And he doesn't do like the others who just take all the information and don't bother referencing it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe referenced it, so them get past. Okay, so let's go. Mil nach reden. If you're ready to talk, at me reden. In the meantime, let's go. Okay, so please take out your Chumashim in Parshas Teitzei. Parshas Teitzei, the coming week. We learned this week, we read this week, for those who were able to hear the Kriyas Torah is Zochaloi, and those who didn't, so we all were Mavad Sedra in Parsha Shoftim. And in Parshas Teitzei, we learn in the beginning of the Parsha, in Kapitel Chof Aleph, in Kapitel Chof Aleph, Pasuk Tes Vov. And I'll read it for you. I'm not going to be Mavad Sedra, but there's just a couple of psukim, which please, if you take out your Chumash, we'll read it together, just to acquaint ourselves with the Parsha. It's today's Parsha for those who learn the Parsha of the week, and that is from Rishon to Sheni. Ki seyeno leish teinoshim ha'achas ahuva v'achas snua v'yoldo leivonim ha'ahuva v'asnua v'hoya ben abcher lasnia v'hoya b'yom anchili ezbona v'es asher yiloi lo yuchol levaker ezben ha'ahuva al pnei ben asnua abcher. Sounds like I'm being Mavad Sedra? No, I didn't say Shnayim Mikra Becha Targum. Ki es abcher ben asnua Yakir los es loy pi shnayim. I'm going to just translate the last pasuk. Excuse it, the last two psukim in English. For those who out there who may need a translation. Okay, and then, so please bear with me for those who can cope with the Hebrew. Then it shall be that on the day that he causes his sons to inherit whatever will be his, he cannot give the right of the firstborn to the son of the beloved one ahead of the son of the hated one. The firstborn. Rather, he must recognize the firstborn, the son of the hated one, to give him the double portion in all that is found with him. For he is in the initial vigor, his initial vigor, to him is the right of the firstborn. So basically, the gist of this parsha is the din of that the b'chor, the father is meant to bequeath the b'chor a double portion. That's the birthright, the double portion of the birthright. And the Torah says it's irrelevant if it's the son of the wife he doesn't get on with, and if it's the son of which he does get on with, or whatever. Either way, the b'chor, which is the firstborn, should bequeath a double portion. And please don't be mistaken out there. I didn't choose this topic because of the saga in Sadugura. That's not the reason I'm discussing this parsha. Like I said originally, I'm discussing the parsha only because it's something fascinating and get to every Yid. So even though we're talking about bequeathing the b'chor, etc., and you know what I'm talking about, for those who don't know what Achnishaten, and for those who know, oh, do you know? So let's move on. In the meantime, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us as follows. So that's the din of that the b'chor takes pishnayim benachla. Now the Rambam in Hilchas Nachlois, where he speaks about the halachas of inheritance in Sefer Mishpatim. So the first perik of Hilchas Nachlois, he talks about the dinei nachala, the halachas of inheritance. And then in Perik Beis, he starts telling us the dinim of the b'chor, that the b'chor takes pishnayim, and all the halachas we have to relate to the firstborn. The Rambam tells us in the introduction to Hilchas Nachlos, that there's one mitzvah. The mitzvah is dinei nachlos. That's the mitzvah. The same, the Rambam also in Sefer HaMitzvahs. In other words, originally, beforehand, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, a mitzvah Kufayim Beis, the Rambam tells us that there is a mitzvah, dinei nachlos, the halachas of inheritance, as detailed in Masechta Bava Basra, in Perik Eshnoichlin, etc. And the Rambam then, in the middle of the mitzvah, the Rambam tells us, and included in this mitzvah, is the mitzvah of giving the double portion of inheritance, to bequeath a double portion to the b'chor. The Ramban disagrees with the Rambam. Both the Ramban ala Torah on the spot tells us on this pasuk, the Ramban tells us two interesting things, and that three interesting things. Number one, he says, the pasuk when it says in the Torah, Lo yuchal v'hoya b'yoyim in pasuk tezayin, Lo yuchal levaker es beno ahuva al pnei v'nasnu ha'abchor, that he is not able, right, to not to fulfill this din, he must bequeath the firstborn his din, and he's not able to do the opposite, says the Ramban, and he elaborates that lo yuchal means, it doesn't just mean he cannot, but it means he may not. And he brings the Targum, when it says lo yuchal, that means less loch rishu. You have no permission, you're not allowed. And the reason why the Torah doesn't say he should not do so, and it says dafka lo yuchal, to be maflik bidvorim, to say you shouldn't even consider it, it shouldn't even be a thought in your mind to what? That you shouldn't give to lo yisuchal. So that's lo yuchal. So he says it's a law with the Torah. The Torah says that lo yuchal levaker. If you have in mind, if you intend not to bequeath to your firstborn the double portion, so even though the Gemara says, and even though the halacha is, that you're a masnal mashakosov b'Torah, your condition is in contradiction to the Torah. The Torah says you should bequeath the double portion to the firstborn, and you make a condition that you're bequeathing only an equal portion to the firstborn. So the Torah, the halacha is you're a masnal mashakosov b'Torah, so therefore your stipulation is null and void. It's bottle. I'm not telling you how to write your tzava out there. It's a zgula farichas yomin. But everybody knows that if you give it beloshin matona, not beloshin yerusha, if you give it as a gift, so then it's also valid, and it's even Steven, it's okay. But we're talking about if it's in the category and with the wording of yerusha, so then he has to bequeath the firstborn a double portion. If he doesn't, says the Ramban, you're over belav. So even though he doesn't get lashes, in other words, it's not going to be binding. Nevertheless, you transgress, even if it's not binding. That's what's novel about it. It's not binding, nevertheless, you transgress. That's one thing the Ramban says. Then the Ramban goes on to say that not just is there a loisa said, there's also a positive mitzvah. It says, Ki has abchor ben, the next pasuk Yudayin says, Ki has abchor ben asnua yakir losses loy pishnayim. So when the Torah says, Ki has ben as abchor yakir losses loy pishnayim. So there the Torah is telling you a positive mitzvah, mitzvah's esse, that there's a positive mitzvah to bequeath your firstborn with a double portion. The Mela says the Ramban, if you consider not to bequeath the firstborn with a double portion, says the Ramban, you're over be'esse u beloisa aseh. You're over in the lav, you transgress the lav, and you're also what? You're over in the aseh. And now the Ramban doesn't just, and he says, these are mitzvahs michudashos, these are new mitzvahs, and I believe it can have a twofold meaning. Number one, it's a new mitzvahs because generally the Ramban himself wrote in the introduction to Chumash Dvorim that generally we don't find new mitzvahs in Chumash Dvorim because it's Deuteronomy, it's a recording and a review of all the other mitzvahs, but he says there are exceptions to the rule. He himself details in his introduction to Parshas Chumash Dvorim what the exception, he says, he gives examples of the exceptions of the mitzvahs. Possibly the Ramban says this expression, they are mitzvahs b'chodashos, because these are the exceptions. He may also mean, like he says in Sefer HaMitzvahs, because in Sefer HaMitzvahs, he reiterates what he says. In other words, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, he says the identical thing in more extensively. And that is, in the mitzvahs, there's a section in the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Ramban. The Ramban wrote many refutes on the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvahs. So they're in the mitzvahs loises. After the mitzvahs loises and mitzvah yud beis, the Ramban says these are two mitzvahs which the Rambam didn't count them as separate mitzvahs. And he addresses the Rambam where the Rambam says that the reason that there's no separate mitzvah because it's part and parcel of the mitzvahs nachlas. It's one unit, one mitzvah with the mitzvah nachlis. There's just another detail on the halachas of inheritance that you have to give the firstborn a double portion. But the Ramban argues, and he says, no, there are two new mitzvahs. One mitzvah is a loisa aseh, and one is the yesa, as we just explained. And he says so, like I say, he expounds on it in the Sefer HaMitzvahs. So he says that's the meaning of mitzvahs mechudashos, they're new mitzvahs. Okay, that's that. He also adds in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, and he says, it says in the Torah, we're going to discuss that, because that's the focus of our shir today, the sugya of Yakir. Yakir means to identify. Yakir means to recognize. That's the Lashon of Yakir. Okay, so he says the Ramban, it's a mitzvah, it's part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah's essay is to recognize your firstborn as the firstborn. In other words, if others disagree or others don't know, or people aren't aware that he's a firstborn, you are meant to recognize. The Gemara says in Masechta Bava Basra Daf Kuf Chav Zayin and in Masechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Ches, Yakir Yakirenu la'acherim. Yakirenu la'acherim, the Rashbam. In Masechta Bava Basra Daf Kuf Chav Zayin says the word Yakir is superfluous. The Mela the Gemara Darshans Yakir means Yakirenu la'acherim, that even if others argue with the father and they say, no, we know this one's the B'char, but the father has been a monus, we trust the father. We'll discuss that in a moment. And the Gemara says Yakir, that's the halacha of Yakir, that the father has the rights. The Torah gives the father the right to recognize and identify the B'char as the firstborn. So the Ramban says when people aren't aware, it's a mitzvah upon the father to recognize and pronounce that his firstborn is the firstborn. That they should make sure that he should get a double portion. Then there's another interesting, so this is all mentioned, like I said, in the Pirush Ramban ala Torah and also in the Sefer HaMitzvahs. This all is also recorded in the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch Mitzvah Tov. In Mitzvah Tov, he starts off Be'ikar. The Sefer HaChinuch follows with the Shittas HaRambam, as in general, he follows with the Shittas HaRambam. Nevertheless, at the end of the mitzvah, he brings also the Shittas HaRamban, what we just mentioned in the name of the Ramban. Like I said, the Ramban addresses this Rambam, and he says, I see the Rambam says that the reason he doesn't count it as a separate mitzvah is because it's part and parcel of the mitzvah's nachlis. But he says, being that the Torah mentions clearly lo yuchal, and the Torah mentions clearly yakir, therefore that's conveying that it's special, a separate mitzvah, and he brings a different medrashim, and then he brings the bal halachos gdolos, which also seems to follow that it's a separate mitzvah. Okay, there's another interesting, fascinating thing the Ramban says, that this halacha, these halachas, that lo yuchal avakir, and there's a mitzvah to be mevakir, right? And he said, given the firstborn, bequeath the firstborn the double portion. Says the Ramban, this is only b'chayei habchor. Gewaldig, he says. Listen to what he says, because look what it says in the Torah. The Torah says, lo yuchal avakir es ben ha'ahuva al pnei ven asnua habchor, right? So he says that the Lashon al pnei means b'chaya. He brings hoichachas. However, it says in the Torah al pnei, it means b'chaya yapchor. The Mela says the Ramban, so even though the halacha is that the b'chor, after he passes away, nevertheless, the b'chor yarshins a double portion. The ben b'noi, in other words, the son of the b'chor yarshins a double portion, right? Nevertheless, that's the din, even bekever. He yarshins a double portion bekever. But the Ramban says, when is he over belav? And when is he over be'eseh? Only when it's al pnei ben asnua, when the b'chor is alive. But if the b'chor died already, then the father has right not to fulfill, to bequeath the firstborn, and he can give that firstborn's a part equal, and he doesn't give him this, and he's not over belav and not over be'eseh, because it says al pnei ben asnua ha-b'chor. And interestingly, even though this Lamaisa B'Poel is a controversial. The many Achronim who bring and discuss this section of the Ramban, and this is already found. If you're interested, maybe I'm sure you are. Let me share this with you, and that is in the Shulchan Aruch Hilchas Nachlis, in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, Simin Reish Pei Aleph, where there's a din of you have to give the bequeath, the b'chor a double portion. So in Siman Reish Pei Aleph, you will see the Ktsas HaChoshen brings this section of the Ramban. He also brings the first part of the Ramban. Let's go back, right? The first part of the Ramban says, the Ktsas HaChoshen brings the first part of the Ramban right in the beginning of Siman Reish Pei Aleph. And with one part of the Ramban, he agrees. With one part of the Ramban, he takes issue with. And the Ur Sameach and Hilchas Nachlis, Perik Beis Halacha Yud Zayin reconciles that. So if you're interested, you can look there. Val Derech Zeh, in the second section of this Rambam, that it says that he doesn't transgress, and he doesn't override this positive mitzvah. After the firstborn's passing, says the what's it called? The Ktsas HaChoshen quotes a Tshuvas Maharit, where the Maharit seems to go against the Ramban, and he says definitely says the Ktsas HaChoshen, if the Maharit would have seen this Ramban, he definitely wouldn't have said what he said, because the Ktsas HaChoshen says this Ramban doesn't see eye to eye with his Tshuvas Maharit. It's interesting, the Pischei Tshuva brings the Sefer Mini Targuma or Mini Targima from Rabbi Shai Pick, Rabbi Shai Berlin, who in his Sefer on the Parshas Teitzei concludes after he brings this Pirush, this Divrei HaRamban, that it's only al Pnei ben Asnu Abcher holds whilst he's alive. With this he reconciles a Lashon HaMishnah, and he brings substantiation to this Ramban, and then he concludes that he's never seen this quoted anywhere. And the Pischei Tshuva, it's an interesting Pischei Tshuva. The Pischei Tshuva takes issue with Rabbi Shai Berlin, because you have to understand Rabbi Shai Pik knows Kol HaTorah Kula, and this is without exaggeration. Nevertheless, he says in his Sefer Mini Targuma that I haven't seen anyone quoting this Ramban or dealing with it. So the Pischei Tshuva goes to town and he quotes many references in Achronim, in Svorim and Mechabrim, who do deal and address this Ramban. So that's just the general Indian in relation to B'cher. And like I say, for this we need a separate shir, and there is a separate discussion possible we actually had years ago. Also, interestingly, the Rogatchover Gaon explains, and Dafka uses this Ramban when Esav says to Yaakov, Hinini hoylech lomus v'lo zeh li b'chayra. So he explains, the Rogatchover Gaon explains what is Esav saying to Yaakov? I'm hoylech lomus v'lo zeh li b'chayra, because he says, that follows with the Ramban. The Ramban says that when does one surely get? When is one certain to get a double portion? Only when the B'cher is alive. But if the B'cher dies, it's not so certain he's going to get, because maybe the father will renege on bequeathing a double portion. The Mela Esav was prepared to do a deal, because he says, Hinini hoylech lomus. And the Mela, if he's not going to be alive, he may not have it after his death. So that's why he's going to do a geschäft now with Yaakov about the B'cher. That's the way the Rogatchover explains the hoylech lomus by Esav and Yaakov. If I recall correctly, other Achronim, possibly the Maral Diskin also says the same there. I don't remember. I have to check it out. But the Rogatchover Gaon says it in Sefer Torah. So we already learned a shtickle Rogatchover today, you see? So Nishkasha, Baruch Hashem. See, so we did it right in the beginning. Gewaldig. Let's go move quickly, because we talk it's late and we decided we're going to finish on time. Now, I'm going to share with you a tshuva of the Rogatchover Gaon, which is to Harav Yitzchak Isaac Herzog, right? Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who eventually was, possibly this was written. The tshuva is published in Shailas HaTshuvas, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, Shailas HaTshuvas, and published by Moshe Rav Kook, and it's in volume 2, Simen Samach Daled and Simen Samach Hey. This was republished in Tofshin in in the year 2000. This was republished in the year 2000 in Shailas HaTshuvas Tzofnos Panecha Chadoshos. Now this is a tshuva of Harav Herzog, I believe, and maybe when he was still in Ireland. I'm not sure about the years, but B'chol Oifim is dated 1935. So in 1935, he asks a shaila about the Rogatchover Gaon, and that's a shaila about a child who was born in a non-Jewish clinic. A baby was born in a non-Jewish clinic, and was born on Erev Shabbos. And the question is, it was Ben Hashmoshes, but nevertheless, the non-Jewish midwife and the non-Jewish doctor, they both agreed that the child was born at night. They testified that the child was born at night. Of course, and the question is if the bris can be on Shabbos and can be Derech Shabbos or not. In other words, does this midwife, this non-Jewish midwife, or this non-Jewish doctor have any namonus? Can they be trusted? Al pi Torah, al pi halacha? Could be that we rely on them in relation to what? That the bris milah should be on Shabbos, because if the child was born at night, so then the child was born on Shabbos, so the bris milah is on Shabbos, so it's Derech Shabbos. But if the child was born by Ben Hashmoshes in twilight, so of course it's not Derech Shabbos. The question is, what section of twilight? It may have been before. Anyway, whatever. The outcome is the Rogatchover, he queries and he raises many different issues. What the Rogatchover has a fascinating tshuva to Harav Herzog, and he says, you have to realize, he says, even though I'm going to bring to your attention, says the Rogatchover Gaon, that a midwife has ne'emonus and is trusted in halacha, and we can accept her testimony, but not when it's relating to mitzvahs milah. It's only in relation to the initial birth and in relation to him being a firstborn. But that's as far as it goes. But she has no nemonis in relation to mitzvah smila, and the Rogatchover Gaon is mechadish that even if the midwife was a Jewess, she was a Jewish person. If the midwife was a Jewish midwife, and she claims that the child was born at night, she has no nemonis. We cannot accept her testimony. Of course, today things may change because we have, if you have a clock with precision, the question is if you can rely on the clock, because if the midwives or the doctors really paid attention, the hospitals can just jot down that the child was born at this and this time. They give you a time, because maybe they'll look at the clock after the child is actually born and it comes out into this world. But the Rogatchover also explains, according to that's the Rogatchover's opinion, that in relation to mitzvah smila, the child is regarded as born when the child reveals his head from the womb, even before it comes out into the open. You get it? That's a Mefurish Gemara. The Gemara says Mefurish in relation to mitzvah smila. The child is regarded as born when the child comes out of the womb, even before it comes out into the actual, into this world. And the Rogatchover says the only one who can know if it's out of the womb or not, it's only the mother and not the midwife. So the Rogatchover Gaon says even the midwife, if she's a Jewess, nevertheless she cannot be relied on. And B'meila, therefore, he takes issue with the whole query of Herzog, that it's like, so to speak, irrelevant, because even if it was a Jewish midwife, she's not reliable. And he, like I say, and Lamaisa B'Pel, if you take out, there's the Munkacher Rav, the Michas Elazar in the Sefer Ois Chaim B'Sholem, and Hilchis Mila, he brings to our attention that it's not so poshut to identify, in other words, to verify if the child is born ben hashmoshes, exactly how we regard the birth. If we regard the birth that the child has to come out into the open, so then you see when the child's born. But if it's regarded that the child is regarded as born when it comes out of the womb, even it doesn't come out into the open, so the Fizeh, there's no way we can know exactly what occurred twilight. Maybe it was in twilight, or maybe it was before twilight, etc., etc. So there's a whole discussion about that. There's also a Sefer Nishmas Avram from a Rabbi Avram, Dr. Avram ben Avram, I think that is, or Steinberg, I'm not sure exactly. And there's also an encyclopedia, Hilchatit Rifuit, from Dr. Steinberg, I think. But whole life, they all discuss that it's not so poshut to verify exactly a birth when it's in twilight. But it's discussed. But the Rogatchover Gaon is adamant that it's a problematic. The Yakir, in middle of the tshuva, and the Yakir, what is the Rogatchover saying? There's a key thing what the Rogatchover says. That when is the midwife, she's not trusted, even if she was a Jewish person, in relation to the birth, which relates to mitzvah smila, because she's not obliged in mitzvah smila. Because she's not obliged to circumcise her child, she has no ne'emonus. And he goes on to bring a sugi in Mesechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Daled, which we're going to share now, we're going to discuss now, based on a Tosfos in Mesechta Kedushin Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph, which Tosfos explains the Gemara in Mesechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, and it's obvious from the Rashi, Mesechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, that in order to be trusted, it has to be something which is biyada. That's the din of woman. Now you have to realize, for the woman, this midwife, right? For the woman to be able to say edus. So even though it's talking about dini mominus, right? We're talking about the case of the Gemara is, let me go and share with you the case of the Gemara. But the gist of what the Rogatchover says is the reason why the woman is not believed in relation to the birth, because if you want to link the birth to know when the bris is, being that it's not her responsibility for the mitzvah smila, being that she's not responsible, therefore she is not trusted in relation to the birth which is relating to mitzvah smila. Mashenke to other things which don't relate to mitzvah smila, they will accept what she testifies. And this is what the Gemara says in Mesechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Daled. The Gemara says in Mesechta Kedushin Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis, and it's Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, it starts off in Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, and it says over there that the midwife is trusted. What is the midwife trusted? And that is if a woman gave birth to twins, and there's a b'chor, right? There's a firstborn, and there's one who was born thereafter. And the question is, who's the firstborn? And the nafkamina is, who gets the double portion, right? Who has the birthright to have the double portion? Who's bequeathed the double portion? Who gets the double portion? So the Gemara says that the midwife is believed la'alter. That means if she testifies immediately after the birth, that the firstborn is She identifies who the firstborn is, so we believe her. Mashenkin, there's 2 days in the Gemara. One day in the Gemara says if she walks out, so then she loses her rights to testify, who's the firstborn. She only has the right to testify, and we accept her testimony only when they immediately at the moment of the birth. La'alter, that's the Lashon HaGemara. Valderech Zed, there's another opinion in the Gemara. If she walks out, it's a null and void. She doesn't, her testimony is not valid any longer. But there's another opinion in the Gemara that even when she was there and she doesn't walk out, but she turns her face away. So for a moment, she's not looking at the faces of the children. She's also not accepted any longer. So if she pays attention to the birth and she doesn't budge, and she sees the firstborn, and then she's the second one, so in other words, she sees the firstborn, then, and she testifies at the moment, so she's believed la'alter. That's what the Gemara says. By the way, there's a whole query in the Rishonim and as a machlokes. Let's go on. Let me just continue on sharing with you what the Gemara says. That's the Gemara in Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. Then the Gemara says in Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph says the Gemara, which is basically the sugya of Yakir. The Gemara says that the three ashloisha ne'amonim al abchor. There are three who are believed. They're trusted and believed. We accept their testimony. We should say that they are abchor, and therefore they deserve a double portion. And that is Elohen Chaya the midwife. And we said, like Rashi says, Chaya the midwife is only believed alter immediately. Aviv, the father and the mother. And the Gemara says, Chaya alter, the Chaya is immediately. Imoy, when is the mother believed to testify that her son is the firstborn, and therefore the son deserves to get a double portion? Says the Gemara, only within the 7 days. Kol Shiva, in the 7 days. Now, most Mefarshim Rishonim learn in the 7 days, and only within the 7 days of the birth. Okay, we'll soon see why. Aviv, says the Gemara, the father has the right to testify that his son is the firstborn, la'olam, always. Kedetanya, says the Gemara, here's the Brisa. It says in the Gemara in our parsha, it says Yakir, he has ben abchor Yakir, losis loy pishnayim. Yakir, says the Gemara, Yakirenu la'acherim. The Gemara says, it teaches us, Yakir means it's superfluous, like the Rashbam says. So it's Yakirenu la'acherim, that means it lies upon him. He must recognize the child and identify the child to others. Mikan amar Rabbi Yehuda neman odom loymar ze bni chor. There's a lot of details of this Gemara. We're not going to go. We're focusing on just on this din. So we see there's an amonus for the midwife up to a point, and very limited. There's an amonus for the mother up to a point for the first 7 days. Then there's an amonus for the father. Now, Bachal, this amonus, the basis of accepting their testimony, even though they're relatives, and we know a korev, a relative is not accepted to give testimony. Also, they're individuals. The din is, if it relates to monetary issues, we have to have two edus. And here we're accepting only one person. It's either the mother or the father or the midwife. And the halacha is for dinim mamanis, it's negayah to give him a double portion, right? We said it's negayah that he's the firstborn. Nevertheless, here we believe even one. Well, for the father, at least we have a pasuk. The pasuk says Yakir. Yakirenu la'acherim. So the Torah places and gives him the full right that even though he's an individual, and even though he's a relative, so the Torah says that he has the right and we accept his testimony. How about the mother and the midwife? Why do we accept their testimony? So in the Tshuvas Harosh quoted, and also in the Tshuvas Harosh, in the response of the Rabbeinu Osher, and also in his Teitzei Harosh on Masechta Kedushin, he says the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts the testimony of the father is because Bepashtus, the father, it's negayah to the father that his son is the firstborn. So Bibal, it's negayah to him. So therefore, it's important to him. It's mutal alav. It's negayah to him. It's relevant to him. It's relevant to him, so therefore he knows to recognize. You get it? So where it's relevant to you, you will recognize and you will identify. That's the reason the Torah gives him the full right. The Mela says the Rosh that the same applies for the mother in the first 7 days and the midwife, because then too, they are the people who could recognize. There's no one else who could recognize the child. The baby, right? The baby, the first 7 days, it's behind. It's the mother looking after the baby. And like certain Rishonim say, the reason why the mother is accepted and trusted, and we accept that the child is the firstborn because the mother is nursing the baby that time. So the mother looks, it's her responsibility. So because she's responsible for the baby and after its birth, So therefore, that's why we accept her testimony that the child is the firstborn. Well, there is the midwife, the immediate moment when the child is born. So like I say, there's a whole so nevertheless, the Ran in the Chidushei Ran and other Rishonim learn that it's dafka mit the Rabbanon, really mit the Oraisa. We shouldn't accept their testimony because they're only individuals, etc. And we need two when it comes to Dinim Mominus. Nevertheless, the Ran says that with the Rabbanon, there's a takanta the Rabbanon were masakin to accept their testimony, and also the Taz, the Torah Zov in Hilchos, in Shulchan Aruch Even Ezra Siman Dalid. So the Taz, where the Shulchan Aruch records one of the dinim which relate to this sugya, so the Taz also learns that it's a takanta de Rabbanon. The Rabbanon instituted it because otherwise no one else would know. So the only ones who are possible to know that this is the firstborn is only the midwife and the mother, etc. Okay. But there is, like I say, a lengthy discussion in Rishonim and Achronim exactly what is the basis of accepting their testimony. And if one is interested, I'm sure you are, in the Sefer Gilyonei Hashas from Rabbi Yosef Engel on Mesichta Kiddushin, he reading the references from Rishonim and Achronim who discuss it extensively. So please look in Gilyonei Hashas. We're moving on. Now, when the Gemara says Aviv is la'olam, just by the way, interestingly, let me just bring to your attention in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says as follows: that where do we see that a midwife is believed and has the right to say that the child is the firstborn? So it says in Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechta Kiddushin, Perik Dalit, he brings him a Furush pasuk. Listen to the pasuk. You all know the pasuk. It says in the pasuk as follows. It says in the case of Tamar, right? You remember? And there she gives birth to who? To Zerach and Peretz, right? And it says, Vayihi be'eis lidata vehine sa'imim bevitna. There are twins, and it says in pasuk Chavtes, in Parashas Vayeshev, Kapitel Lamed Ches, Vayihi kemeshev yoda vehine yotza ochi v'atoymar. I'm sorry. Pasuk Chavches, Vayihi belidata vayiten yod, vatikach hameyaledes, vatikshar al yod shoni loymar, ze yotza rishayna. So we have the miyaledes, the midwife saying on the first one, ze yotza rishayna, and therefore she talks about parrots, maporatz, da'olach parrots, etc. So she's the one who's saying, so the Talmud Yerushalmi says from here we have actually a pasuk. We don't have to have any pulpulim. We have a Mefurish pasuk stating that ze yotza rishayna, that the midwife can say, give testimony to the ze yotza rishayna. But what is interesting is as follows. In the Pirush Mara Aponim on the Yerushalmi from the Pnei Moshe, publishing a standard Yerushalmi, it seems the Rogatchover Gaon on this pasuk in Parshas Vayeshev wants to say the same thing. The Mara Aponim says really this is merely not a good enough proof, and that's why in Bavli this pasuk is not quoted. Because in addition to the testimony of the miyaledes, of the midwife, she's also doing a maisa. She vatikshar al yodoi shoni. You get it? The midwife takes some crimson thread and tied it on his hand. So it's not just her testimony, she actually makes a siman. So there's a maisa she does. So says the Mara Aponim, because she does a maisa, so maybe possibly that's not good enough proof that just her testimony, her words are good enough. So therefore, maybe that's why the Bavli doesn't bring this pasuk. And this is actually seems to also be conveyed by the Rogatchover Gaon in the pasuk in Parshas Vayeshev. So we already mentioned 2 Rogatchovers already before 9:30. Wow. Okay, we're moving on. It's very late. Also, in relation that the father is believed to say that Zeh b'ni b'chor, and the father is always believed. So like the Gemara says, Li'olam, in the Sefer Revid Azov, from a great Gaon who was in the Bezdin of the Vilna Gaon, and I'm not going to mention on the Zoom meeting exactly his issues because I mentioned it in Oil Dvara. Of those who remember when I mentioned the Revid Azov, exactly the issues with him. So I'm not going to say it mitzad u'moitzi diba huksil, but I'll call upon him. You got the hint, and I think what I said is good enough. So in his sefer, a phenomenal sefer, Revid Azov ala Torah, which a lot of the Pirush Torah Tamim is taken from the Revid Azov. He was from Vilna, the Bezdin of the Vilna Gaon. So he actually brings a raya that we see the father is always believed to say that he's the B'chor, and he brings it in his commentary of Revid Azov in Parshas Vayichi, and also in Parshas Teitzei. It says in the pasuk when Yaakov came to give the brachas to Menashe and Ephraim, so what does Yosef say to him in Parshas Vayichi, pasuk Memches, Kapitel Memches, pasuk Yutches, Vayomer Yosef alaviv loy kein avi ki zeh abchor, sim yemincha al roshoi. Yeah, so we have a testimony of Yosef saying ki zeh abchor. And Yaakov says, I know he's the B'chor, but nevertheless. So he says this pasuk conveys that Yosef is saying, he's giving testimony, the Aviv. His father is always believed to say he's a B'chor. Okay, I'll call upon him. We're moving on. These are different pasukim mentioned, but like I say, there's a separate Shakalavatari, exactly what are the criteria of this that we trust them. Now, in the Aviv La'olam, there's a Machloikis, but Pashtus. Just by the way, so this halacha, this din, is recorded in the Rambam, this is recorded in the Rambam in Hilchas Nachlas, Perik Yud Aleph in Hilchas Nachlas. Sorry, I don't know, what did I say, Perik Yud Aleph, sorry. It's recorded in Hilchas Nachlas, Perik Beis, halacha Yud Dalit, in Hilchas Nachlas, in the Rambam and Sefer Mishpatim, the way it is, more or less verbatim of the Gemara, Val Derech Zeh, the Shulchan Aruch, in Shchoshen Mishpat, Simin Reish Ayin Zayin, this din is also recorded in the Torah and in the Shulchan Aruch, Simin Reish Ayin Zayin. Now, when the Rambam says, Shloishen Na'emanim al Abchor, Chaya v'imay v'oviv, so he says, Chaya miyad, Chaya is believed immediately, like the Gemara says, Shem Omra, Zeh Yotza Rishon Na'amenes, Imay Kol Shivas Yimei HaLeida Na'amenes, Loime Zehu Abchor, all the 7 days of the birth, she's believed, V'oviv la'olam, Oviv la'olam. Now, the Lechem Mishnah wants to learn in the Lashon Rambam, that Stimas Lashon Rambam, means always. Always means not just after the 7 days kick in. La'olam means always, even from the day of the birth. In other words, the midwife just at the moment of the birth, the altar. The mother only the first 7 days. The father, la'olam means always. La'olam doesn't just mean after the 7 days. La'olam means la'olam, kipshuto, la'olam, that's what la'olam means. So the Lechem Mishnah wants to say that's what la'olam would mean. In the Rambam, Valderazah the Korban is Sanel, on the Rosh in Masechta Kedushin, says the same, that's how it seems from the Rambam. Valderazah, this Pirush, that la'olam means always, even from the moment of birth, right? Is also quoted, this Pirush is quoted in the second Pirush in the Sefer Yad Rameh from Rameir Abulafia on Masechta Kedushin, which was recently in the last many years published from manuscript. So in the second Pirush he says, why? Because the Torah says Yakir. The Torah says Yakir, that the father has the rights, right? And he has to testify that his son is the B'chor, and therefore he gets his bequeath. He gets the double portion. The Torah doesn't make any distinction between when. It says Yakir. So there's always a Yakir, there's always an Ammonis, that Yakir, and Lacherim, even from the moment he's born. Okay, that's the way one would learn in the Rambam. Someone is, let's look now, but nevertheless, let me take out a Rashi for you. This is the Rashi we're going to focus on. It's very late. Rashi says as follows. Listen to it carefully, and a very interesting Rashi. If you have a Gemara Masechta Kedushin, the find Dalet Amud Aleph, please take out your Gemaras and take out the Rashi, a Gewaldige Rashi. Rashi says Kol Shiva. Why is the mother believed Kol Shiva? Says Rashi. So Rashi learned when the Gemara says that the Aviv v'imay, Chayel alter imay Kol Shiva, Aviv la'olam is only after the Shiva. Only after the 7 days. Take a look at the Rashi. Kol Shiva. Imo is trusted and believed to say Zebni B'chor, Kol Shiva, all the 7 days. And Rashi says, but the father not. Why? Sha'adayan ein aviv makir boy. Because the father doesn't recognize, when your firstborn was born and when your baby's born. So exactly how much do you recognize? You're walking up and down the corridor, and you need to get some medication because you have to settle down, and then you see the baby, and do you really recognize your baby? You're out of your mind. You're more out of your mind than your wife is. Okay, what's the difference? Let's not talk about it. I'm sorry that I said it. But so it says, Rashi says, Sha'adayin ein aviv makir boy. The father doesn't actually recognize the child yet in the first 7 days. Would you believe that? That's a Mefurish Rashi. He doesn't recognize it, doesn't identify him. Now I saw they want to like soften this Rashi. He doesn't recognize them well. That's what they want to say. I think the Archcroll says he doesn't recognize the child well. Well, they want to beat Sagat and Salite and make everybody happy out there. For those even who never learned Gemara in their life, so they shouldn't think that the Torah is outcast or whatever, and it's coming from the cave age, etc. So no, it means he doesn't know them well. It doesn't say that in Rashi. In Rashi it says Sha'adayin ein aviv makir boy. Now makir means recognize. Doesn't mean the father doesn't see what the child looks like, but it means to recognize, and that's what hakora means. Hakora is not yediyah. Hakora is hakora. Let's move on now. Identify. And Rashi says why? Shelo yotza mitachas yidei imoy. Because the child hasn't yet been released from his mother, likones libris, to enter the bris. In other words, when the child enters the bris, The father is then obliged to bemal the child. And interesting what's found in the Meiri, that based on this, it seems that the bris, the child, the firstborn, is to be circumcised first, before the second son. Even though it's day, what's the difference? So the Meiri says this, that it seems to say in his Pirush that yes, that the father recognizes him when it's likonis lebris, that he's the firstborn, because he has to know he's the firstborn. There are other days who say no, even the firstborn doesn't have to be dafka circumcised first; he can be circumcised second. So there's a discussion about it. But nevertheless, they bring a Tosfos read to substantiate this Meiri. But whatever the case is, in general, Rashi is saying likonis lebris because the child wasn't yet released likonis lebris. Therefore, the father doesn't recognize the child. Therefore, the din of Yakir hasn't been said in the first 7 days. Mikan ve'elach, but from here onwards, mutal al aviv la'akiroi mutal. It lies upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed upon the father. Right? It was placed upon the father la'akiroi to identify and to recognize him. K'dechsiv Yakir, like the Torah says, Yakir yakirenu la'acher. Okay, so it's very clear from Rashi. The Rashi is of the opinion that when is the testimony of the father come into play is only from 7 days onwards. In other words, after the 7 days and not before. There is the Taz. I mentioned the Taz earlier in Shulchan Aruch Siman Dalet. There the Taz wants to learn even in Rashi. Even in Rashi, that Rashi will hold that in generally speaking, the father doesn't recognize the child in the first 7 days. But it can be that the child can recognize the child the first 7 days. And if that's the case, Rashi will also agree that the child is believed la'olam like the Shita Rambam. But I'm not so sure. That's the sheet of the Taz. But most achroinim and the Ikar, what's neged to us is the sheet of the Rogatchover Gaon. It's very late, so the Rogatchover Gaon definitely learns in Rashi. The Rashi is of the opinion, even though the Rogatchover Gaon is of the opinion that according to the Rambam it would seem la'olam that the father is believed from day one. But in Rashi it's very clear that the father is only believed after the mother lapses, after the 7 days. Like I say, many achroinim learn that way in Rashi, and many poskim learn that way in Rashi. There's an interesting. Okay, let's move. The Iker. Here comes the Rogatchover Gaon and says an interesting thing, L'chaim. Now this is found, like I said, in a response of the Rogatchover Gaon, which b'meila therefore, and this was published from a tshuva of Rav Herzog. Now I believe the tshuva of Rav Herzog was published many. I don't have the original tshuva, but it's definitely that Shilas tshuva was published by Moshe Rav Kook many years ago, I believe, and therefore this was published in the year 2010. Now, like I said, the Encyclopedia Talmudis was just published. Nevertheless, they don't reference this, so I don't have to. I have no issue if they don't reference a Rogatchover Gaon, which was published in 2014. Even though that they should have also referenced that, which that is a Masechta Kedushin Afayim Dalet, where there the Rogatchover says the same thing. But nevertheless, I'll call upon him in the Shuvas, in the Shadas of Shuvas, which was republished and published a Shuva from Rav Herzog, which was definitely published years ago. It's surprising that it's not referenced in the Encyclopedia Talmudis, volume 44. I'm not going to dig it in any longer. We're moving on. And like I say, I'm only mentioning it, Lili Nishmas, Rab Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, Yeh Zichrei Baruch. Now the Rogatchover's query is as follows. The Lashon HaGemara is very clear that the mother is believed for 7 days, right? Isn't that the Gemara say? Kol Shiva. She's believed for 7 days, okay? And then the Rashi says, when is the father believed? The father is believed la'olam, meaning from the time of the bris and thereafter always, right? For eternity. Now, if you take a look, so the Rogatchover queries as follows. What about the night? The night leading to the bris, the Leil Ches, the night of the bris, the night which we call, I'm going to spill the beans now, but it's okay. I think I kept you in suspense. We're almost at the end of the shiur, so I can tell you. Vach Nacht. Ask the Rogatchover, what about Vach Nacht? What's going on in Vach Nacht? And that's what's a shaila. Shaila is as follows. Mitzvahs Mila. Now the Gemara says before she's believed 7 days. 7 days? Well, 7 days is up. Vach Nacht is all over. The 7 days are up. No more, right? She's out of the picture. But Rashi says, why does he kick in after she is released? The father kicks in because there's a knisa lebris. When is the knisa lebris? The din is that we mal the child on the 8th day, and the din is you have to be mal the child on the 8th day. You can't be mal the child on the night preceding, leading to the day. That's the din, right? You can't be mal the child early. You have to be mal the child on the day ches. Asks the Rogatchover Gaon, what's happening with the night, Vach Nacht? In other words, in relation to this din of the Gemara. The Gemara says that Gimel on Ne'emonim, 3 have the right to testify that the child is a b'chor. So we've l'chora covered all the areas. What areas have we covered? We've covered the immediate birth. We've covered the 7 days. We've covered from the 8th day onwards, right? To what? And for eternity. You get it? What about Vach Nacht? Seems to be a vacuum. Now, according to the Rambam, there's not a problem. Because according to the Rambam, the father is believed, li'olam, starting from the birth. So that's not a problem. According to the Taz in Rashi, that Rashi will admit, so it's also not a problem. But generally speaking, according to Rashi, according to all opinions, definitely, it's the way Rashi says it. So what about Vach Nacht? Who has the right to give testimony that the child is the firstborn at Vach Nacht? Will there be any nafkaminis la'alacha? Maybe yeah, maybe not. But listen to what the Rogatchover Gaon says. So the Rogatchover Gaon brings to our attention as follows. That Vach Nacht, let's forget about Vach Nacht, but in general, the night, he brings to our attention, and here we come to an Yerushalmis. The Rogatchover Gaon shares with us many Talmud Yerushalmis, not from the Bavli, mainly from the Yerushalmi. And I mentioned this once before of Hirschberg from Mexico, the chief rabbi from Mexico. And he says, nice, you wilt hören, nice is doing Yerushalmi. The Shtuke nice and Bavli. In other words, a Yidus, a Baki, B'shas, a Poskim can tell you that if you want Chadashot is in Talmud Yerushalmi, that's where you'll find the Chadashot. Nice is doing Yerushalmi. Well, the Rogatchover is going to share with us a Talmud Yerushalmi at the end of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, the end of the first parak of Rosh Hashanah, and also found in Masechta Megillah, and also share with us a Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechta Yevamis Perik Ches, Halacha Ches, which is also found in Talmud Yerushalmi in Perik Yutes, Halacha Hey, and also share with us a Talmud Yerushalmi in Perik Ches, Halacha Beis of Masechta Bava Metzia. And interesting also a Bavli in Masechta Sukkah Daf Lamed Gimel. So let's go quickly through this. The Talmud, so the Rogatchover brings to our attention, the Gemara queries as follows at the end of the first parak of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, and also found in Masechta Megillah and Talmud Yerushalmi. The Gemara says as follows: the din is that chavitin, they're right. We say every day in our korbanos, we say the chavitin, that there's chavitin, that was a korban which the kohen had to bring daily. In the Beis Hamikdash, in the morning and in the evening, etc., 6 loaves, right? This is the Chaviti, Kohen Gadol, the Chavitim. So the question is, Chavitim had to be brought also on Shabbos, and it's Deicha Shabbos, Valderazah, the Korban Tomit, which is Deicha Shabbos. Now, to prepare the Korban Tomit, Valderazah, to prepare the Chavitim. So we had to do there were preliminary, there were many machshirin, many things which had to, before we were able to bring the Korban of the Chavitim, right? As the Minchas Chavitin, there are many preparations which we have to prepare this Korban Chavitin. There are things which we have to boil water, and we have to knead the dough, and we have to, etc., etc. So there are many malachas, but these are preliminary malachas. These are machshirin. These are preliminary before we have the final Chavitin. Now the question is, the din is Chavitin. The balditz kavua. So therefore, there's surely Deicha Shabbos, and we can bring the Chavitin as a korban on the Shabbos. Well, there is the Korban Tomit. How about the Gemara queries? The same goes with the preliminary things. In other words, what we have to do, the machshirin, the cooking, the boiling of the water and the kneading, all of that, to prepare the chavitin, to bring the korban, is also allowed to be done on Shabbos. But the Gemara queries, are we allowed to do the machshirin Friday night? The korban itself, the fact is that we can bring korbanos only daytime. You don't bring korbanos at night. So we don't bring korbanos Friday night in the Beis Hamikdash. We don't bring korbanos any night in the Beis Hamikdash. Beyond korbanos, we have to bring korbanos only by the daytime. The question is, here comes the Yerushalmi and queries, If the korban has to be brought in daytime, can we do all the preparations Friday night? Or must we say that because the korban itself is brought only at daytime, so therefore the same should apply for the preparations of the korban, which entails Chilul Shabbos, can also be, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is matir that to bring the korban, possibly it has to be done dafka on the Shabbos day. So the Gemara brings a raya from a Mishnah Masechta Tamid that even though the korban itself has to be brought dafka on the Shabbos day, nevertheless the machshirin, the Gemara says that all of it was done before dawn. All the preparations of the chavitin, the cooking and the boiling and the kneading was done before dawn, Friday night, meaning before Shabbos morning. So it's very clear, the Gemara says, maybe that's talking about even weekday. No, the Gemara proves that in the Brisa it says that all of that was done bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. So we see clearly that the machshirin, the preliminary inyanim for the korban, the machshirin can be done the night before. So the Rogatchover basically brings to our attention from this an interesting proof that we see from this Talmud Yerushalmi that even something which has to be done at daytime, right? Things like in this case, things had to be done at daytime. The korban can be brought only by day and not Friday night. It has to be brought Shabbos day. Nevertheless, the machshirin, the preliminary things which are needed for the korban may be done even what? Even Friday night. Even though the gufa korban, the actual korban, is brought by day. But mainly he brings to our attention the same would apply in relation to this case, in relation to our case, which we're discussing. In other words, about the ne'emonos of the father. In the night, the Vach Nacht, that l'chayra, even though he is obliged and he can only do the mitzvah smila and perform the mitzvah smila tomorrow by day, but nevertheless, possibly, we can still regard the father as obligated and obliged, even though he can't implement it, but he already becomes obliged in Vach Nacht the night before, just like in the case of Machshirin. That's one thing the Rogatchover Gaon says. The same, he extends this same query in relation to Machshirei Mila. The din is those who learn the Sechta Shabbos. You just finished Daf Yomi Sechta Shabbos. So in Rabbi Lezer the Mila, we know Rabbi Lezer holds that Machshirei Mila is Deicha Shabbos. So the mitzvah Mila is Deicha Shabbos. And he also says the Machshirei, if you have to bring the knife, you have to make the moil messer, the knife has to be brought to be carried, etc., or even made. So it's allowed to be manufactured even on Shabbos. The question is, are you allowed to manufacture it Friday night? Or just do we say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, that just like the actual mitzvah smila has to be done on Shabbos? So the daito, he holds the machshirei mila can also be deicha Shabbos. But maybe the machshirei have to be done only when the mitzvah is performed. And just like the mitzvah is performed on the Shabbos day and it cannot be done Friday night. So the same, the machshirei should be able to be done and performed and a mutter to be done only the Shabbos day, but maybe not before. So the Rogatchover says from this Talmud Yerushalmi is proof, l'das, to say that l'das Rabbi Lezer, who says machshirei mila is deicha Shabbos, that the machshirei may be done even from nighttime, which this is also found already in other achreinim, and that is in the Sefer Imir Bina from Rameir Orbach, in the Sefer Imir Bina on Hilchas Shabbos. So he wants to bring raya from this Talmud Yerushalmi to say that according to Rabbi Lezer, and machshirei mila is like a deicha the night before. There's actually an interesting lekach toy from Rabbi Yosef Engel, who claims that he has a total different shot of this Talmud Yerushalmi, and he says the reason why the Talmud Yerushalmi wants to segregate the night from the day, even though generally it's the night and the day is like one unit, he says because we find in the Mechilta that there's a separate mitzvah, a separate din of keeping Shabbos Friday night, and there's a separate din of keeping Shabbos by day. So therefore he says what the heter for the day is lav dafka heter for the night. So according to him, this is negei dafka to Shabbos, not negei to other dinim. So therefore he says this cannot prove for us in relation to other dinim. But the Rogatchover learned that this Talmud Yerushalmi, even though it addresses Shabbos, this will also, so to speak, shed light on many other dinim, like the case we're discussing in Masechta Kedushin Dafayin Daled Amud Aleph. We're moving on. Another case the Rogatchover brings to our attention, which is more direct to our inyan, and that is the Gemara. The halacha is the Gemara in Masechta Yevamos queries. The din is that one who was not circumcised is a kohen, a regular kohen, an adult kohen who was not circumcised because they couldn't circumcise him. Because unfortunately, for health reasons or whatever, he's not allowed to eat truma. He's not allowed to consume truma. An oral is also with truma. We derive it from sukkin. Okay. And the halacha is that it's just like an oral is not allowed, and someone who's not circumcised cannot consume truma. He cannot either be anointed with shemen shel truma, because the Gemara says that the Rambam holds us midoraisa, because shemen, anointing one's body with oil of the truma, anointing is like what? Is like consuming beverage or food. So therefore, just like you can't consume truma, an oral can't, someone who's not circumcised can't consume truma, the same, you can't either anoint anointing. Now the Gemara Masechta Yevamos Tafayin Aleph Amud Aleph queries, what happens a child who is not circumcised in the 7 days before he becomes, before the bris, before the 8th day? So the child is an oral, right? So if the child is an oral, are you allowed to anoint the child with shemen shel truma? We just finished saying that an adult oral cannot be anointed because you're not allowed to use the truma for someone who is an oral, right? Because anointing is like drinking or eating. So the question is, the oral, right, who is the child who's before the 8th day, is he regarded as an oral, or we can't anoint him? Now, from the Talmud Bavli, it would seem the Gemara queries. It's not very clear in the Talmud Bavli if it comes to any conclusion or not. Now, in Lamaisa B'Perl, the Kesef Mishnah, in the Rambam Hilches Trumes Perik Yud Aleph claims that the Bavli concludes that the child in the first 7 days before he's circumcised is not regarded as an oral, and you may anoint the child with the oils, but the Mefarshim already take issue with the Kesef Mishnah, even though the Kesef Mishnah says it and the Marikorku says it, but they say it seems that the Mokar and the source of the Rambam is dafka not from the Talmud Bavli, because in Talmud Bavli it remains question, but the dafka, it was reconciled in Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechta Yevamos Perik Ches Halacha Ches, which is also found in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechta Shabbos Perik Yutes Halacha Hey. There the Talmud Yerushalmi makes it very clear, and it says that the child before the 8th day is not a problem to have the child be anointed and then smeared. You can use the oils on the child's body. And even though because the child is not regarded as an oral. That's what it says in Talmud Yerushalmi. So they say that the Rambam, the source for this Rambam is coming from Talmud Yerushalmi. It seems the Rogatchover learns that way also, and it's a very clear Chuvas Avnei Nezer and many other Achronim, Avnei Nezer and Yerideisim and Gimel says that's the Mokar of the Rambam, and many other Achronim say the Mokar of the Rambam is this Talmud Yerushalmi. Well, here we go further with the Talmud Yerushalmi. Talmud Yerushalmi not queries. The Talmud Yerushalmi says, if after the 8th day, if we didn't circumcise the child, so definitely you can't anoint the child with the shemen shel truma, right? Because he's an oral. In the first 7 days, we said it's not a problem. Why? Because the mitzvah of Milah hasn't yet arrived. So therefore, the orla is not regarded as an orla. So he's not called an oral. When is someone regarded as an oral? Only when he was obliged, you're commanded to do the mitzvah and you don't do it. So then it's begetel oral, and therefore you can't anoint, you can't use the shemesh shel truma. So the Talmud Yerushalmi queries, if that's the case, what about the Vach Nacht? The night in between the 7 days and the 8th day. Tomorrow morning he's going to have the bris. How about the night before? Are you allowed to anoint the child with this oil or not? Oh boy, says the Talmud Yerushalmi, that you're not allowed to anoint the child. You're not allowed to anoint the child the night, the Vach Nacht, with the oil of the Truma. That's what the Talmud Yerushalmi says. The Talmud Yerushalmi brings a raya from another din, and that is in relation to korbanos. The din is that a korban, when does a korban become suitable to bring on the mizbeach? Only after the 8 days. But before the 8 days, the Gemara says, right? The Pasuk says the Gemara in Masechta Zvachim Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says, first the Pasuk says that for 7 days you can't. And then the Torah says from the 8th day it's good. Says the Gemara says, the Torah says the 7 days you can't. It seems the 8th day is good. And then the Torah says only from the 8th day, so it seems the 8th night is no good. In other words, what about the night in between? One part of the pasuk seems to say the night leading to the 8th day is good. And the other pasuk seems to say that the night leading to the 8th day is no good. Says the Gemara as follows: the night is good for consecration. In other words, the night leading to the 8th day, you can consecrate the korban, but you can't bring the korban until the 8th day. That's what the Gemara says in Masechta Zvachim Daf Yud Beis. So the Gemara, the Talmud Yerushalmi says the identical thing in relation to the baby. The child, even though we circumcise the child after on the 8th day, but the night before, it's like the korban which you consecrate. You can already, so to speak, you're already obliged to circumcise the child. You're just not allowed to, because you have to wait for the daytime. You can't do it at night. But the mitzvah milah kicks in already at night at Vach Nacht. Interesting. So therefore, says the Talmud Yerushalmi, already from the night of Vach Nacht, you can't, he's regarded as an oral, and you can't anoint the child with this Shemesh Shel Truma. So the Rogatchover Gaon seems to prove that we see that the night leading to the day, even though it's not the time you're able to actually fulfill the mitzvah, nevertheless, the night before seems to be a time which still relates to the mitzvah itself. And the Meforshim want to say that this depends on another shaila in Masechta Zvachim and in Masechta Krisos, Daf Ches, and also brought in Masechta Chagiga, Daf Tes, if mechusar zman can mechusar maisa or not. If something which is, so to speak, it's missing the zman, when, in other words, is it regarded because it's before the time is actually when, the time is actually on the daytime, right? The question is, if it's premature, if it's regarded as premature the night before, or is it regarded premature the night before? So it's mechusar zman. We're not doing it the day, the night before. Is that mechusar zman? In other words, do we say that the time hasn't come yet? Or do we say mechusar zman lavka mechusar ma'aseh, and it's not a problem, and it's not regarded as premature? So there's a machlokes in Gemara, so they want to say that how to judge the night before will depend if we say mechusar zman is mechusar ma'aseh, or mechusar zman is lavka mechusar ma'aseh. Okay, well this basically is actually a shaila. There's a query, and this is brought to our attention also by the Minchas Chinuch, this same thing, which the Rogatchover brings proof from the Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Rabbi Engel also does the same in the Sefer Tziyunim L'Torah, and he connects it also with this Rashi. He brings this Rashi in Masechta Kedushin in Klal Chavav. He also brings this Rashi al derech, like the Rogatchover wants to say. He brings, in other words, he raises the issue of the night, what the halach of the night is, and he seems to conclude that the night, the father already has the nemonos of the night because already he's regarded, the child is regarded as if he's an oral, and therefore you're not allowed to anoint the child. So according to the Rabbi Engel, it would seem the nighttime is like the daytime already. The Minchas Chinuch mitzvah in mitzvah Reish Pei Beis queries, because he brings a query of the Shagas Aryeh. The Shagas Aryeh in mitzvah Nun Gimel queries about the night. He says, what kind of din does the night have? In other words, the din is as follows. The Shagas Aryeh mitzvah in Siman Nun Beis says that if someone circumcises his child within the 7 days, says the Rabbi, says the Shagas Aryeh, that's not regarded as if he fulfilled the mitzvah, because the chiv of the mitzvah didn't yet arrive. So if you do it within the 7 days, you have to do it again. There's no question about that. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. And definitely, therefore, you have to do it from the 8th day onwards. What about the night, the Vach Nacht, asks the Shagas Aryeh. How do we understand the Vach Nacht? And he queries as follows. He says, do we say that the Vach Nacht really is regarded as he's obliged in doing the mitzvah? The only reason why he can't do it is only because it's nighttime, and the halacha is you have to do it at night, that day, and not at night. So according to that, if you end up doing it, b'di'evet, maybe it would be regarded, it's not called kodim zman ha-mitzvah. It's not like the first 7 days. The first 7 days, the mitzvah hasn't arrived. But maybe Vach Nacht, the mitzvah is regarded as if it has arrived. The only why we just can't implement it because it's night, it's not day. So there's a side issue, a technical reason why we can't do it. Or now says the Shagas Aryeh, maybe it's regarded as mechusar zman. Maybe Vach Nacht is regarded as like the 7 days until the actual morning of the 8th day. It kicks in, we say that it's like mechusar zman. And if we say mechusar zman, lav is a problem, that means it's regarded as premature. So just like if you do it in the 7 days, within the 7 days, it's not regarded as a fulfillment of the mitzvah. If you do it in Vach Nacht, it's not regarded as a fulfillment of the mitzvah. The fact is that the Minchas Chinuch takes this Shagas Aryeh in the mitzvah Reish Pei Beis, and he says that he doesn't bring the Talmud Yerushalmi, but on his own, Minas Svora, he says that I believe that the Vach Nacht, you wouldn't be able to anoint the child because we say it's as if the mitzvah kicks in. So therefore, he wants to take issue to some degree with the Shagas Aryeh. Al derech zeh, Rabbi Engel in Tziyunim L'Torah, Klal Chavav, addresses the Shagas Aryeh head on, and he says from this Talmud Yerushalmi, it's a pella that the Shagas Aryeh had farzende Yerushalmi. It's very clear from the Talmud Yerushalmi that the night actually is regarded as if the mitzvah kicks in already. You just can't implement it because it's nighttime. The Rogatchover goes down, because it's late, I'm not going to be able to share with you the additional information of the Rogatchover going. He brings another whole shaklavataria by dichui eitzel mitzvahs. There's a whole shaklavataria in the Gemara. If there's such a din, there's a din of rejection. By korbanos, there's a din of rejection. The question is, if by mitzvahs, there's a din of rejection. Take a look at Masechta Sukkot of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. So there's a couple of Rashis on that page, and the Rashi on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph and Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. So the Orach Laneir and those Rashi seems to say that when is the mitzvah of lulav regarded as, if it's rejected, when is regarded? When it has to be regarded as rejected? Only when the mitzvah kicks in. Rashi says in Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph and Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the mitzvah of lulav kicks in when Yom Tov kicks in. Asks the Aruch LaNer, when Yom Tov kicks in, you can't take the lulav at night. You have to wait till tomorrow morning. Yom Tov kicks in at night. And he concludes that he says maybe it only followed with the man Omer and Masechta Zvachim that Mechus's man is not a problem, like we mentioned a moment ago. But he's not happy with it and he remains with the Tzorachiyun. The fact is the Mishnah Berurah is Simon Tov Kuf Pei Vav in relation to Tkiyah Shofar raises the same issue. So if you'll take out a Tov Kuf Pei Vav, he also talks about the Rosh Hashanah, a shofar shel avodah zarah. So the question is, if it's rejected because it's shel avodah zarah, when is it regarded as rejected? It's rejected from when Yom Tov kicks in, or from the morning. And he says, according to this Rashi in Masechta Sukkah, it's regarded from when Yom Tov kicks in, and he has the same tzorachiyun as the Aruch LaNer has. But the fact is that we see, I'll call upon him. Let me conclude, because we have to finish right now. And here we go with what the Rogatchover Gaon says. And he says on this, Be'emes, says the Rogatchover Gaon, now we see there's a whole shakla exactly how to understand. So, how to understand, there's another Rogatchover, there's another Talmud Yerushalmi, in Masechta Bava Metzia, in Masechta Bava Metzia, Perikei, Halacha Beis, I mentioned that originally, and that is in a case where someone borrowed an ox, right, an animal. He borrowed to use it one day, and for the next day, he's going to rent it. Right? So if you borrow it and it dies on you, so you're chayiv, because you're chayiv ba'oinsin. Even if it dies, so a shoyel is chayiv ba'oinsin. But a seicher, a renter, if it dies on him, he's potter from oines, if it dies on him. So the question is, so the shoyel, he borrowed it on Sunday, and his deal was that Sunday I'm borrowing it, and Monday I'm renting it from you. That was the deal they made, right? So what happens? What happens Sunday night, right? What's the din of Sunday night? What happens if the animal dies Sunday night? Is the borrower, is it regarded as a borrower or is it regarded as a renter? You get it? Because the one who borrowed it didn't return it to the one who lent it to him. So I borrowed it, so maybe I'm still regarded as a borrower the night before the next morning kicks in, before Monday kicks in. And Monday is going to be the seicher. So maybe I'm regarded as a shoyel even at the night, even Sunday night. And if that's the case, I'll be chayiv. Or maybe we say that even if he hasn't yet returned it, he's regarded as the renter already from Sunday night. And therefore, we would say that he's potter and he's not obliged to pay. So these are two opinions in the Talmud Yerushalmi. So the Rogatchover Gaon brings to our attention this thing. That's his whole focus in general in his whole methodology of learning, that all of these different halachas, even though they're talking about different topics, they're all connected to judge exactly where we have a night which is borderline, with one status and another status. How do we judge that borderline? So here the Rogatchover comes with his gewaltige chiddush, a murderdige chiddush. Now let me share with you, realize Vach Nacht. Vach Nacht is negayah to Klal Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, Yidden have babies, and children are born, and we know there's a meaning of Vach Nacht. What is Vach Nacht? Vach Nacht means plainly, literally to stay up this night, right? And we know the different inyanim, different minhagim of Vach Nacht. Some make su'udes, some make different su'udes, and there's a big shaklavitari and achroinim. If the su'udes are a su'udes mitzvah, some say it's not a su'udes mitzvah, most accept it's not a su'udes mitzvah, but exactly what is the celebration? They make a big simcha, they learn the Zohar, there's so many different minhagim of Vach Nacht. You say Krishma, etc., etc. Was ist das Vach Nacht? Darf sein Vach, darf sein off. That's the key issue, right? So the fact is, says the Rogatchover, I got to read for you the words of the Rogatchover in this response to Rav Herzog. And this is also found in his gloss on Masechta Kedushin, which was recently published in 2014 from his manuscript of Masechta Kedushin. And this is what he says, Ube'emes, says the Rogatchover, after he brings this Rashi. That Rashi says that the woman is trusted with the child for 7 days. The father is trusted la'olam, but only because of the bris milah. But the question arises, what about Vach Nacht? Says the Rogatchover, Ube'emes mizeh yotza haminik. Be'emes, from this is derived the custom. Now I want to say, this Rogatchover is fascinating because in all the Svarim I've seen, and you can Google and you can check it out and look at all the Svarim, they all explain it, al derech hadrosh, val derech hamusar, val derech hachsidis, val derech kol mini pilpulim and inyonim, vasidos Vach Nacht. But no one gives a halachic criteria to Vach Nacht. The Rogatchover is the first one I've seen who gives a murderdike halachic guideline to Vach Nacht. And that is because the shaila is, who is the one who is trusted to give support to that child in Vach Nacht. And the Rogatchover Gaon learns that because the mother is released, because the 7 days are up, and the father's nemonus kicks in only when he has to do the bris, so Vach Nacht, there's no shomer. There's no one nemon, not the mother and not the father. So darf man hieten dem Kind. Darf man sein Vach. This, right immediately, the midwife looks after the kid. The 7 days, the mothers look after the kid. Throughout the for eternity, the fathers looked after the kid. But watch with Vach Nacht, sagt der Rogatchover. From this is derived the custom that he didn't sleep the night of the child. When the family gather, they call it a night of watch. Why? Says the Rogatchover, being that all the 7 days the mother is trusted, is believed. And from the 8th day, then from the 8th day the father's believed. That the whole Vachnach, the whole night of the early Yom Ches, the child is Yotza Mirshusayim, it's gone out of the rishus, the surveillance of the mother, and it hasn't yet come under the surveillance of the father. Es soll nicht schwach werden. In other words, the child has no support, no one's looking after him. And then he brings the different Talmud Yerushalmis. So this is what he says in the response to Torah Herzog. And then he also says, these are the words of the Rogatchover Gaon in the Tzaf Paneach, Amasech Kedushin, Zeh HaGeder Mashenagu Shmira, B'layla Shalifnei Amila, Zeh HaTam. So that's the halachic reason. Interesting to note, I've noticed that the Encyclopedia Talmudist does reference, not this Rogatchover, he references a sefer called Zecher David from Rab David Moedina, which was published by Avat Shalom, which brings Garada some, approaches it in this light, that we see, we identify the child like the korban, that the korban, we say the night, we can concentrate the korban, and by day you bring the korban, so the same the child, like the Gemara says, the Gemara in Yevamis, the Yerushalmi in Yevamis, and the Gemara in Zvachim, so the same the child also by night. The Zohar says that the child by the Mila is like a korban, so therefore by the night already the mitzvahs Mila kicks in, so to speak, so the holiness of the mitzvah kicks in, therefore there were celebrations made. So this is what is written in the Sefer Zecher David, which was reprinted from Xavier, from a great Italian Gadol from a couple of hundred years ago. Valderach the Munkat Sharov and Nois Chaim V'Sholem says the same thing, Valderach, based on this Talmud Yerushalmi, but the only one who gives this very clear halachic criteria, and that is that it's based on halacha. Because it's felt in amonos from the tata mit mammon, and that's where there's a vachnacht where you have to be sure with the child. Is after the Rogatchover Gaon is the Rebbe soll get mas soll no sein simchas bei Yidden, und soll sein me ashbois yor im evyoin, soll sein a good gebencht yor, yashakar for having, yashakar for coming. Good night.